You may have seen this pixelated or bitmapped digital looking effect around town, and you stare at it for a while, basking in all of its beauty, thinking to yourself, if only I could do that. The good news is, you can, and the effect is called dithering. Dithering is a form of image processing that creates the illusion of tonal detail by strategically arranging binary pixel data according to a mathematical algorithm. Quite the mouthful. So dithering actually has practical functions besides just looking cool, but we're designers, of course, so mostly we just care about it looking cool. Now, there's tons of different dithering algorithms that each render a unique effect on your artwork. Take, for example, Floyd Steinberg, or what you might know as the diffusion dither. This one is native to Photoshop, so you've probably seen it around quite a bit, but there's a ton more algorithms like Bayer, halftones, modulation, stitching, and just so much more. And on top of that, the workflow for dithering in Photoshop is a headache. It's extremely slow and very difficult to customize without a lot of back and forth. And a lot of the time, you're simply just doing guesswork. You have to create a whole new document, paste your image in there, convert your document to grayscale, then convert it to bitmap, then back to grayscale, then resize it back to the original DPI, then convert that back to RGB. And after you do all of that, you realize you want the effect to be a bit brighter. So now you're stuck doing it all over again. So how can we both get access to all of these really cool dithering algorithms not offered natively by Photoshop and make the workflow a lot smoother, shorter, and easily customizable? I want you to meet DITHERTONE Pro, the all-in-one high-performance bitmapping and dithering plugin for Photoshop. After months and months of hard work, my team and I have come up with a way to access over 30 of these unique dithering algorithms within Photoshop. The plugin works in real time, and you get full control over the effect with options to blur, sharpen, adjust the brightness, contrast, and this part is really cool. You can color the effect almost akin to a gradient map. So you can choose to dither the shadows, midtones, and highlights all concurrently and assign a color to each, and that all happens in real time. You can also experiment with some of the different included modes and extra controls, but more on that later. Now let's hop into Photoshop and check it out. Okay, so this is a graphic that I mocked up to display what we're about to do here. Right now it kind of looks like ass, but just you wait. Let's open up DITHERTONE Pro, which we can find in our plugins panel here. So I'm gonna go up to plugins and then open up the DITHERTONE Pro plugin. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a lot of settings to mess with here. But before we get to mess with any of them, we have to click on the render button. So I have the layers selected that I want to do that bitmap effect on. Let's go ahead and click render. Boom, would you look at that? Anyone who's ever done bitmapping before, strictly through Photoshop, knows that it sucks, okay? The process sucks, it's super slow, and it's an absolute blessing to be able to do it in just one click. But not only that, we can completely customize this effect now in real time. So no need to go back and forth and figure out, you know, maybe I wanted it brighter, maybe I wanted it darker, I wanted the dither effect to be bigger or smaller. All of those things now we get to control in real time, no back and forth. Okay, so already this looks gorgeous, but let me go ahead and reset everything. This is what it looks like right out of the box. Let's go over some of these settings here. But before I do that, actually, I want to dock this into my workspace. Okay, I don't want it floating around here. And the cool thing about this plugin or any Photoshop plugin is that you can dock it directly into your workspace. So maybe I want to put it on the right side here, and let me just consolidate all this into one tab. Okay, cool. There we go. So now it is docked directly into my workspace. Up here in the render settings is where you're going to control the size of the dither using the input DPI. Turning the DPI down gets you a more blown up, sort of larger effect, and turning the DPI up makes that effect really small and brings out more of the detail in your artwork or your image. Also, while you're changing the scale, you'll notice that it's going to change the zoom level on your document, and that's just simply how the plugin works. Mostly it's going to stay put, but if you do want to fit the document back to your screen, a useful keyboard shortcut you might want to know is Command or Control 0, and that's going to fit your document perfectly onto your screen. So that just might help you a little bit while you're changing the input DPI for this dither effect. As you can see, turning the DPI down really low gets that really blown up effect, which is really cool. For our purposes, I'm going to leave this at around 30 or 40 just so we could see a bit more of what's going on in the artwork. Next up is the resampling, which I'll get into more a bit later. But basically, this is just going to control how the edge of that dither effect looks upon rendering. So if you have the resampling set to preserve details, it's going to render out with smoother edges. But if you have that set to nearest neighbor, it's going to keep the sharpness of those harsh pixel edges. But yeah, just messing with the size ladder here, you can see just how much of an improvement this is in both speed and functionality from how you traditionally bitmap something in Photoshop. Let's move on to the algorithm. So this is currently the Floyd Steinberg dithering algorithm. And like I said, this one is native to Photoshop. You might know it as diffusion dither, but we've got so much more to play with. So let's open up this dither algorithm, drop down, you see it's sorted into a few different categories. The diffusion algorithms up here are all going to give you a pretty similar effect, but some of them, like this Atkinson dither, have a more distinct look, or Jarvis Judas Ninki, I believe it's pronounced, has more of a stippled look. So when it comes to diffusion, you have quite a bit to play with here. Next up, we've got the coveted modulation algorithms. These are insanely cool. So we've got the standard CRT-like modulation waves, and this is just awesome. We can also choose between having these thinner lines, or we can go to the medium lines or heavy modulation, which at this DPI is kind of blown out. But really quickly, if you're using the medium or heavy modulation, you probably want to turn the DPI up a bit and turn the brightness down or something, just so that effect isn't super overblown. So as you can see, just some small changes there made a world of difference. But anyway, let's go back to the other algorithms. So we also have a column modulation. So this is rendering those modulation lines horizontally instead of vertically. We have a dispersed modulation, which is really cool. It's sort of diffusion-esque, but it's got this really distinct sort of sharp angle to it, which looks really cool. So this is definitely a favorite of mine. Another favorite here, which I think is just awesome, is circuit modulation, which is, first of all, it's just beautiful, but it makes your design or artwork sort of look like a circuit board, and it's just so awesome. So this is really cool to get sort of a techie effect, and obviously you can mess with all these settings here to really customize it. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the circuit modulation algorithm. I think that's probably one of the top 3 algorithms we have in this plugin. So you definitely want to give that a spin. We also have a tilt modulation, which is sort of like a diagonal hatch. So that's pretty cool. Moving on to the pattern algorithms, we got a ton to play with here. So matrix is really cool for that. Obviously matrix sort of cyber sci-fi look, knit, cross, square, serpentine. We got quite a few in here. Rect block, which I think is awesome, and also variable hatch, which I think is really cool. Obviously, you get sort of a cross-hatched look, and sort of each tone of the image gets a different style. So we got this sort of checkerboard going on in the mid-tones, the hatching going on in the highlights, and then this sort of toned down checker for the shadows. So that's just a really cool look. Beyond that, we have the Bayer algorithms, and these are very common. You've definitely seen these before. Just to show this off, we got the 2x2 Bayer, 4x4 Bayer, and basically the higher the numbers go, the more detail you're getting out of the algorithm. So the 4x4 Bayer is really cool, and then we go all the way up to an 8x8 Bayer, and this generates that really cool sort of star pattern dither on your artwork. You've definitely seen this around. It's one hell of a look, and it's awesome to have it be so easily customizable in this plugin. So that's definitely another favorite of mine. Moving on, we got Sierra, which is pretty similar to the diffusion algorithms as well, but there's definitely some differences between them if you sift through all of them. So I find that the Sierra algorithm is a lot more sort of a stippled look. It's more spread out and a bit more stochastic, I'd say. So it doesn't look as digital, I guess, as something like Floyd Steinberg. So this is the default Sierra. We also have Sierra 2-row, which I'll turn the DPI down so you can see a bit better. So this one sort of looks like a blend between a diffusion algorithm and the modulation algorithms. So we're getting that nice detail of the diffusion, but we're also getting, especially in the highlights, these wavy parts that look like that sort of modulation going on. So that's real cool. Sierra 2-row is definitely a good one. Now let's check out the halftone algorithms, which screen printers, you know I got you. So I'll just click on the first one here, and this is going to be at a 0-degree angle. And when you're using halftones, you're probably going to want to scale the DPI up quite a bit. So I'm going to bring this up to, I don't know, 90. And look at that. Beautiful halftone effect, super easy. We also have 2 other angles to choose from. Both of these, especially the 22.5 degree, are very popular angles when it comes to screen printing. So you've got that at your disposal if you're using this for printing purposes. But if you're not, it's also just a cool stylized look. So a 22.5 degree angle actually gives kind of a screen printed look to the halftones. This is an angle you often see within screen printing. And then the 45 degree angle, this is also used extremely ubiquitously, especially in things like print or comic halftone effects. And of course, for all of these algorithms, you're able to change things like the brightness, contrast, and whatnot. And of course, you can also experiment with the tonal controls to add some color to this, but I'll get into that later. Let's finish off this list of algorithms. So then we have this star pattern, which is sort of similar to the ordered dithering or the Bayer patterns. There's a grid pattern, which is really cool. Vertical stitch, which I also love, as well as the horizontal stitch. Clock dither, as well as a cyber algorithm, which is really cool as well, especially for something like a sci-fi effect. So that's the rundown of pretty much all the algorithms. I'm going to go back to horizontal stitch here because I just personally really love this one. Now that's just the algorithms, and you saw how fast that all updated in real time. Now let's move on to the effect controls. So these controls here are going to allow you to customize and perfect this dither to your liking. First up, we have options to sharpen your image, which when you're dithering comes extremely in handy because often dithering is accompanied by a loss in detail in your image or your artwork. So sharpening that image or artwork really helps to negate that loss of detail. So we have the sharpen strength here, which is going to control the strength of the sharpen, but no matter how much we turn this up, it's not going to affect the image until we mess with the sharpen radius. And the sharpen radius is pretty much going to control what parts of the image you want to sharpen. So a smaller radius sort of accentuates the really tiny sort of textural details within your image. And the higher you bring it, the more it affects the overall tone and detail of the image as a whole. So this is something you definitely want to play and experiment with to find what suits your image the best. I find for this one, using a smaller sharpen radius really brings out everything nicely. And then of course I can mess with the sharpen strength as well to dial that effect in just as much as I want. Then we've got noise, which you know this one. It's going to add noise to your dither or your image. And this grants a lot more of a stochastic effect, which can be really cool, especially paired with some other dithering algorithms. You've also got denoise, and denoise is pretty much just going to smooth out your image or your artwork. So it sort of looks like a blur, and we do have options for blur down here, but denoise is not a blur. There's a very important difference between denoise and blur. So like I said, denoise is actually smoothing out your image. And you can see this better if I turn the DPI up. So now the DPI is really high, but if I turn the denoise up, you can see exactly how that's affecting our image. It's really smoothing things out. It's rounding some corners. And so if you have any heavy texture within your image, it's going to sort of get rid of that. So denoise is a massive lifesaver when it comes to dithering. And that is because dithered images look best when the transitions between the values and the gradients is very smooth. So cranking up the denoise helps to sort of smooth out the tones of your image and get a nice gradiented dither going. Denoise helps especially when you're using something like the modulation algorithm. So let me go ahead and click on one of these modulation algorithms. Let's bring the DPI down a bit. I'm also going to bring the brightness and contrast down so we can see that better. Okay, so often you're going to want to pair the modulation algorithms with the denoise because it's just going to give you sort of a smoother effect and smoother lines the more you turn up the denoise. So as you can see, as I turn up the denoise, we're getting a lot smoother lines and they're sort of blending into each other more. And it really gives us that cool CRT circuit bent effect. Now we've also got this control for blur, which obviously is more of a stylized and more heavy of an effect. And I think this is especially cool when using it on something like text. And lastly, for the effect controls, we have brightness and contrast, which again, you know this one. This is going to affect the brightness and contrast of your image and really allow you to dial in the perfect effect that you want. And that's all happening live as you do it. So you can really craft the perfect dither effect. Okay, now the real kicker, let's look at the tonal mapping controls. It was already a feat getting all these algorithms and controls into the plugin and having them render at such a high speed, but I decided to put my developer through even more hell and try to figure out how to render up to 3 instances of the dither at once. I'm joking. He loves working with me, I hope. Anyway, I could show you this better than I can explain it. So let's go ahead and choose 2 color on the tonal mapping. And this is pretty much just where you choose how many colors you want rendered into your dither. So if I choose 2 color here, we're going to have 2 colors on our dither. And from here, we're able to control the colors and the intensities of both of those. So we have the highlights, which are white currently, and the midtones, which are currently pink. And we can control the intensity of either of those by dragging these sliders around. And similarly, if you wanted to add another color for the shadows, we switch that to 3 color. And now we have the shadows as this purple, the midtones as this pink, and the highlights as white. And of course, we could click on any of these colors to open up the color picker and change that to whatever we want. So I'm going to change the highlights to this orange color, the midtones to this pinkish purplish color, and the shadows to this dull bluish color. And that is looking real damn cool. Maybe I'll adjust the intensities of the highlights a bit or turn the midtones down just to get more of those shadows peeking out. Or I can mess with the contrast and brightness of these settings up here. And you can really see just how much having these controls up here helps to just lock in the perfect dither effect, especially the sharpen. If I turn the sharpen off, I mean, this just does not look nearly as good as having some sharpen on the image. So that is like just absolutely necessary. And of course, we have all the other effects or effect controls here to really perfect this. So that is pretty damn cool. And that's actually an understatement. I mean, this rocks. Okay, this is awesome. Now, right below that, we can change the background color. So right now the background is set to black, and that is because the image that I'm using or the artwork I'm using it on is mostly dark, and the background that I want it on is black. If all these black spots were white, it just wouldn't look right. So you have the option between a black background for darker artworks that you want on a black background or a white background for lighter artworks. But this is important for 2 reasons. 1, because of what background you want your design in, and 2, what background or what color background you want the plugin to knock out upon rendering. So we actually have a knockout mode, and that's this button right here. And by the way, if you want to see the legend for what all of these buttons do, simply just click on the question mark here. That's going to tell you exactly what all of these buttons do, but I'm going to get you in on that right now anyway. So this button right here is the knockout mode, and when you have this enabled, whenever you render your dither, it is going to knock out the background color or whatever background background color you choose in the background controls here. So since I have black chosen, it's going to knock the black out of this layer when I render it. So really quickly, I'm going to render this by clicking save down here, and you'll see that the black background has been knocked out and it's actually revealing this layer that I have underneath, which I don't want it to reveal. So I'm going to turn that off, but the black background is actually gone. So if I turn off this black background, you can see that there's no black in this. It's being knocked out. So I could change this background color to whatever I want. Maybe I want it to be red or something, or blue, whatever, it doesn't matter. Point being that it knocks out the background color of your dither, which is really cool. You get a transparent dither out of that. Also, upon rendering, if you're using multiple colors in your dither, it renders into this group, and from here you can still change any of the colors used in your dither effect. So if I wanted to change the color of the highlights, I would just have to open up the layer styles of the color overlay, and I can change this color to whatever I want. So that's pretty cool. It's still customizable. Depending on your document, you also might notice that if you're zoomed out or zoomed to fit, that the dither looks a bit weird from a distance. It may have some gaps between the layers or just look a bit blurry, and that's because of a problem with Photoshop's compositing that I outlined in a previous video. But if you want to see how your true dither looks, all you have to do is zoom in a bit. So if you're noticing any weird visual issues with your dither upon render, just zoom in a bit, or alternatively, you could just make the group into a smart object, and that's going to sort of composite it all into one layer, and that's going to sort of fix any of those visual issues popping up. And while we're at it, we can also check out what the difference looks like between having the resampling set to nearest neighbor or preserve detail. So this is what it looks like on nearest neighbor. As you can see, the edges are very harsh. It's got that straight, sharp pixel edge. If I were to render this with exactly the same settings, except now I set that resampling to preserve details, I'll click save on that. Now you can see the edges are way more rounded, they're smoother, they're sort of blending into another, and this is a really cool look that I personally love and wanted to include in the plugin, and this is honestly what I opt for every time. I just love the way it looks. I love how it makes all these sort of square details into circles and blends and smooths out all the pixels into these cool shapes. So again, this is what the preserved details resampling looks like. We got those smooth edges, and this is what the nearest neighbor resampling looks like with those harsh edges. And now I'll quickly go over all of the other extra controls in these buttons here. So the first one here is the text mode. If you open up the help dialog here, it's also known as the transparency mode. And as it says in here, this mode is best turned on when you're dithering something like text or shading layers. If you're using Photoshop to draw or paint something in and you want to dither the shading layer, I'm going to show you why this mode exists right now. So let me turn this off and I'll go and find something like text to showcase this on. Matter of fact, let me just type out the word dither here, throw a cool layer style on this or something. So say I wanted to dither this text, I'd click on render here, but it's going to come out with a bit of a weird effect. I'm going to change this color back to white real quick as well. So this is obviously not really what our text looked like. We're getting that dither effect coming through, but there's some weird glitchy stuff going on here. The edges of the text here are just acting weird. And this is going to happen if you're dithering text or really any layer that has transparency on it. So because all of the pixels beside the text are transparent, it doesn't really know what to do with these edges. So that is what this button up here is for. This is the transparency mode. So let's go ahead and click this to turn it on. So now let's put this on a black background, and we're going to change that to white in a second here, but just to demonstrate, we can see that the effect now looks a lot better. And what it's doing is it's filling all those transparent pixels with this black background. So now the edges aren't really acting weird. If I turn that off and on, you can really see the difference. So this is with transparency or text mode disabled, and this is with it enabled. So you definitely want to turn this on. Make sure you turn it on when you're using the DITHERTONE Pro plugin on something like text or shading layers where there's transparency in that layer. Now, originally this was on a white background. So if we wanted to change this background from black to white, we could just click on the little black box here, and that's going to change the background to white. So that's an important detail. If you're on a white background, you also want to make sure to change the background down here to white as well. That's going to not only let you control the color of this with the color options here, but also if you have knockout mode enabled, it's going to knock out whatever background color you set here. So since we want that white knocked out, that's what we're going to choose in the background color down here as well. So just make sure the background color down here and the color up here are the same if you're using text or transparency mode. And now we can dither this to our likings, make it look all neat and cool. I'll choose the star algorithm here. And like I said, the blur effect really works well, especially with text. So you can definitely play with that as well. But yeah, so that's a really quick display of what the transparency mode does. Let's check out this third button here, which is the mask mode. So basically, if you turn this on, this is going to dither only your layer mask. So whatever layer mask we have on the layer, that is what's going to be dithered. Let's go ahead and add a layer mask, and I'm just going to paint in a layer mask here with a soft brush. And once I click on render here, it's going to render this pretty much with the layer mask baked in. But if I want to dither just the layer mask, I have to click on this mask mode button, and now it's going to focus and dither only the layer mask. So I can choose whatever settings I want here. The blur option is also useful if you want to feather out your layer mask a bit more. So now when I save this layer mask, it's going to have that dithered effect only on the layer mask. And that's really awesome to have that option. If say you're working on a design where you want to fade out an image with a dithered effect, then you would paint, in the layer mask with a soft brush and fade it out and then go ahead and dither that layer mask. Also super helpful if you're working for print and don't want to have any transparencies. So that's a really awesome option to have. And by the way, it also works on groups. So let's say I had a layer mask on a group here. Let me just paint in a quick layer mask here. If I click render, make sure I have mask mode selected. And now the dither is going to work just fine on that layer mask, which was on a group originally, but I made sure to add this function where it works on a group or a layer, just in case, for ease of use and full functionality. So if I were to save this, it now replaces that layer mask on the group with this dithered layer mask. And finally, we have a few other things here. So this one's really simple, this button right here. That's just going to save whatever settings you choose for the next time. So if you want to save your settings, go ahead and check on this button. And then finally, we have the color Embue mode. And this one's really cool. So let me show you. If we're working on an image, say like this, and we want to get that dithered effect on it, but we also want the original colors of the image to shine through, we can use the color Embue mode. So I'm going to click render on this, and I'll turn the color of it back to white. I'll get these settings all dialed in how I want them to be. And generally, when you're using the color Embue mode, you do want the dither to be a bit brighter than you would usually put it. So that's just a note to keep in mind. I'm going to change the DPI down a bit so we get a bit more blown out of an effect. And now we'll click on the color Embue mode, and you can't see it yet, but once you render this, it's going to place the original colors of your image on top of your dither. So let's go ahead and click on save here. And now you see it places that original image on top of our dither. And now we have those original colors peeking through. And basically all that's doing is taking the original layer and setting that to multiply on top of our dither. So if we really wanted to, we could experiment with different blending modes here, like color burn, darken, lighten, screen, whatever, hard light, etc. So these are all things you might want to experiment with. But here's something I like to do with the color Embue mode. And this is a functionality that I added. So let me take the original image. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to set this back to normal, and I'm going to click render here. And for the tonal mapping now, I'm going to click on 3 colors. And so now what you want to do is set the highlights at something like white, or just a highlight color, something in the upper range of the tones. Mid-tones, you can set it somewhere in the middle, and then shadows somewhere on the deeper, darker end. Okay, and I'm going to turn the highlights down a bit as well so we get more of that color peeping through. So now when I have the tonal mapping set to 3 colors, and I have the color Embue mode on, when I click save here, it's going to change the blending mode of that original layer to color. And now since we have more tones to work off of, since we rendered this, with 3 separate tones for these shadows, midtones, and highlights, the color effect is actually more faithful now. It looks really, really nice. And this is an awesome little effect. Of course, you can still go in and maybe mess with the levels of this photo, really do whatever you want. You can also mess with the individual colors of the midtones and highlights and shadows layers. And this is pretty much going to change the luminosity of those colors. So that's something you definitely want to mess with as well. I think that's a really cool effect and really cool addition to the plugin is this color Embue mode, especially when you're using it alongside the tonal mapping. Okay, so that is DITHERTONE Pro in a nutshell. There will be more videos to come showcasing all the cool things you could do with this plugin, as well as design process videos for things like this and this. There's just so much to explore and so many awesome things that you can make with this plugin. This was purely a demonstration on how it works. And as much as I want to keep telling you how great it is, I think you just saw for yourself. So after months and months of hard work in perfecting this plugin, it is finally available now at DuranSupply.com. I promise you're going to love it. I personally cannot stop using it myself. And I've sent it to a few other designers to test who have told me that it's along the lines of one of the best plugins they've ever used. And I really want to see what you make with it. There's just so many possibilities considering all the algorithms and the customizations that you have at your disposal. So please tag me in anything you create using this plugin. You can get DITHERTONE Pro for 15% off by using the discount code YouTube15 at checkout. Go ahead and get this plugin to start dithering smarter, not harder. That is DuranSupply.com, and I'll see you there. Peace out.